And then we'll circle back to the sort of broad overview that Helen's going to share with IMLS when she's able to join us again. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so you should see Museums for Digital Learning, which is the first project we're going to showcase today. So Museums for Digital Learning is a brand new platform that we are just launching right now. And it has been a few years long collaboration between 4 main organizations. That includes IMLS, or the Institute for Museum and Library Services, as well as the Field Museum of Natural History, History Colorado, which is the State Historical Society of Colorado, and then also Newfields Lab in Indianapolis. So this gives a sort of broad overview of the platform and of the project. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the project and the front stage of this platform for those of you who may be interested in using this platform in your K12 classrooms. So what Museums for Digital Learning is really all about is thinking about bringing all of the rich assets that museums across the country, and I'm talking about all types of museums, not just history and science museums, but also science centers, children's museums, zoos, aquaria, planetariums, historical centers, every type of cultural organization really that you can think of that falls under the umbrella of museums. And thinking about how we translate those rich resources of collections, objects, of documents, of rich media that we have, and packaging them up for K12 audiences to be able to use and interact with, not only on site at museums, but really bringing those resources into classrooms across the country. So you can see, I'm just going to do a little bit of a navigation of the site for you. You can see you have a bar up across the top. We've got About, Resource Kits, Collections Hub, and Museums. About really just shares a little bit more about the project and what you can expect to see on the site. As you'll see here, objects are really the sort of main basic building block of all of the resources that are a part of the site. We use objects and stitch them together, building content around those objects to make different activities. And then those activities are all baked into resource kits that are tied together by a question that students might investigate or a basic theme that they investigate together. The next part of the site is resource kits, which at this point is really the main hub for K12 educators to be able to access all the materials that museums are creating. At this point, we have pilot resource kits that have been created by both History Colorado and Field Museum, the 2 lead content partners, but we actually have 16 museums that have come on board to create pilot kits, and we're in the process of recruiting additional museums to be able to really make this a rich resource that has a tapestry of different kinds of collections and expertise from different museums across the country, and there will be more to come, certainly, as the site becomes more widely available to people. So as you start to look at how to navigate this resource kits page, there are a couple of different filters that you'll notice. You can also search if you have a particular topic or kit that you know you're looking for, but you can search by grade band, K2, 3.5, 6.8, and 9.12. You can filter by subject area, so English language arts, science, social studies, and the arts. You can filter by media type if that's what you would like to look for. And if you know specifically that there's a museum that maybe you are very a big fan of or have a particular collection in mind, you can also filter by the types of museums that have contributed to the site. So as you'll notice down here, you can then further filter by resource kits, which, as I said, sort of bring together these activities and objects across a main theme, across a question that you might want to investigate. But you can also look at individual activities if you'd like. and you can look at individual objects that are part of those activities. So as you'll see, there are quite a few objects that you can take a look at. For the sake of today's overview, we're going to take a quick look at the resource kits. So as you can see, there's quite a few different resource kits that are available here. It'll tell you in the upper right-hand corner which museum has contributed to this resource kit. Some are authored by one particular museum and some are authored by multiple museums. As you can see here, this is one that Field Museum and History Colorado have co-created. And so we're going to take a look at one of these resource kits together. Tully Monster Mystery is a favorite of mine, so we'll take a look at this. Once you click on that tile that includes the resource kit title, you're going to be brought to a landing page for this particular resource kit that includes all of the activities. We recommend doing them in the activity that they're listed to be able to create the greatest continuity and gain the greatest meaning from the objects and the activities that are included in a resource kit. From Field Museum, we always start activity 1 by really setting the stage and thinking about what is the question that students are going to be investigating as they look at the objects and interact with the activities that are a part of a resource kit. So this particular resource kit is about the Tully Monster, which for a long time was a mystery to museum scientists, to scientists around the world. And the Tully Monster happens to be the state fossil of Illinois. And so we at the Field Museum in Chicago have quite a large collection of Tully Monster fossils. And for a long time, scientists did not know whether the Tully Monster was an invertebrate or a vertebrate. And so really, it is posing the question to students whether they think this particular organism may have been an invertebrate or a vertebrate. So we look at an object like this one, which is an artistic rendering of what Tully Monster may have looked like, but then also looking at some of the real objects that are a part of our collection and bringing those into the classroom. A couple of key features that I want to point out is that objects always have this ability to take a closer look. If you want to zoom in, you can zoom out. So there's some deep zooming options available. And then objects also have this really great object info button associated with them. When you click on that, a little window pops up that has all of the metadata associated with that unique object. So it will include what collection it was from. It may include things like genus and species, if it's a biological specimen. So a lot more rich information that you or your students may be interested in looking at. Just click back and you'll be back to that particular activity. In this resource kit, we've really set the stage with a video that we have from one of our collections managers of fossil invertebrates, Paul Mayer. And he really sets the stage to be able to think about how scientists have really been wrestling with this puzzle for a long time. So we asked students to view this video with a couple of questions in mind. How do scientists at the Field Museum know about the Tully Monster? And which modern creatures do scientists think the Tully Monster might have resembled? After that, we have them think about this question of, do we think Tully Monster was an invertebrate or a vertebrate? One quick feature that I want to point out is that these videos are all embedded into the platform itself, so you don't have to click out and click over into YouTube. You can play it right here in the platform itself. After that, in this particular resource kit, we ask students to think about what a vertebrate is. So this is using a different activity type. This activity type basically allows for a slideshow of different objects and rich media that have particular pieces of information associated with it. So this really sets the stage for for students to understand what makes an invertebrate. What are the features of an invertebrate? So we're going to look at a few different examples of invertebrates: gastropods, millipede, scorpion, an ant, bryozoan fossil. As you can see, again, each of these has an object info button that you can click on and learn a lot more information. Then in activity 3, in this particular resource kit, we ask students to think about what a vertebrate is. So they're looking at different examples, just as they did with invertebrates, thinking about what the main features of a vertebrate vertebrate organisms are. So a penguin skeleton, a fruit bat, a sparrow. Again, these are all objects that you can find in the Field Museum's collection. So again, you'll find quite a bit of metadata associated with this particular object. After looking at all of the key features that make something an invertebrate or vertebrate, we're going to take a closer look at Tully Monster specifically. So we have the Tully Monster ID. In this activity, students can actually interact with the object themselves. So we ask them to take a closer look at one of our fossil specimens of the Tully Monster. And one of the things that I really love about this activity type is that you can actually have your students really manipulate the object and layer information that they have found onto the object themselves. So they can paint if they'd like to. So you can see they can add text. So we'll add text here. I'm going to label this iBar. So they can add text labels. They can add shapes and icons if they would like. So there's a whole lot of available tools to be able to annotate a particular object. Really nice feature on this particular activity as well is the download feature. So once a student has completed this particular activity, they can download that image with all of the information that they've included on that image and annotations, and upload it onto Google Classroom or any other learning management system that you might be using. Following that activity, we have a hotspot activity. So it's looking at the same fossil that the students were looking at previously. And in this instance, they actually have basically a key to what they were looking at before. So we have some particular pieces that are labeled here with icons. We have the iBar, that students can find more information about the iBar. We have the body labeled, the proboscis, the fins. After taking a look at Tully Monster a little bit more closely, then we invite students in another one of the slideshows to take a closer look at some of the various fossils that are a part of the Field Museum's collection. So this showcases the variety of different fossilized specimens that we have, and really help students to understand that each individual specimen is going to look a little bit different, and scientists can gather different information from different types of fossils. So we have some that show the full body in sort of a funny position there. We have others that just show a portion of a Tully Monster specimen. Finally, in Activity 7, we reveal that after 50 years of research, scientists were finally able to solve the mystery of the Tully Monster, and they were able to determine that Tully Monster was in fact a vertebrate. So super exciting, and we would definitely invite you to take a closer look at many of the resource kits that are here. If you are a science teacher, if you are a social studies teacher, if you are an English language arts teacher, or a general education teacher in early elementary, I guarantee that there's a resource kit and objects that would be of interest to you and your students on the site. The final piece that I wanted to take a quick look at is brand new. We're rolling out new features all the time right now, and this just came online, I think last week. This is called the Collections Hub, and this is actually populated by all of the objects that are a part of each of the resource kits that the museum content partners have uploaded. So any object that is uploaded into the site for those resource kits also is uploaded into the Collections Hub, which really places learners at the center and teachers at the center. So whereas the resource kits have allowed museums to tell a particular story using the objects and stitch those objects together with a particular narrative they have in mind, the Objects Hub or Collections Hub allows for students and teachers to take those objects and pull them together in collections that they may wish to use in a particular lesson or a particular study. So, for example, I have curated a Tully Monster collection here to go along with our other example. So this is actually pulling many of the Tully Monster specimens that have been uploaded into the MDL site. And that is saved with my Museums for Digital Learning ID. But then you can also take a look at the objects page. And let's say I really just want not just to look at Tully Monster, I might want to look at all fossils. So I'm going to do a search for fossil. And as you can see, many, many more fossils come up here. And also some of our rich media comes up here. So Fossil Hunting 101 or the Field Revealed Tully Monster video. So we can curate these into a fossil collection if we would like. So I want to save this sea jelly fossil. It's saving it to Tully Monster, so I just have to click change here. And then I say save to a new collection. I'm going to title this fossils, save. And now anything that I want to save, I just click on this little save button and it will save to fossils right down there. Let's save a fern fossil and a tree bark imprint fossil, just as an example. Now I'm going to go back into collections. Let's see if I do a So eventually this will show up. I think it's just got a little bit of lag time in my collections. Along with Tully Monster, I will end up with a fossils collection that I can include and use with my students as I wish. So the last tab here that I just want to quickly go over showcases the different museums that have contributed to Museums for Digital Learning or that plan to contribute to Museums for Digital Learning in the near future. And as I said, we are bringing on new museums all the time, and each of these museums is adding additional content in the coming years. And so each of these museums, as you can see, we have a wide variety of museums represented, from natural history to art museums to historical societies. There is a huge wide variety, and I definitely invite you to check it out on museumsfordigitallearning.org. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Arana, who's going to talk a little bit more about Games for Change.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, sorry. Okay, so my name is Arana Shapiro. I am the Managing Director and Chief Learning Officer at Games for Change. And Games for Change has been partnering for the past year and some months with IMLS to develop and deliver a program called Game Plan, which focuses on museum education, bringing game design into museum education. I'm just going to give a brief overview of Games for Change, and then I'll dive into an explanation of the program. So Games for Change has been around since 2004, and it really is the leading advocate for the power of games beyond entertainment. So it's really about looking at digital video games and how they can be used for good beyond just entertaining. And our main areas that we work on are there's four main areas where we work. The first is this platform for the exchange of ideas. We run events that bring people together, thought leaders in the world of games and social good. Our flagship event is the Games for Change Festival, which is happening July 12th to the 14th, virtual and free, so everybody should join. The second area that we work is with youth and educators, and empowering both youth and educators to help create the next generation of game designers that are looking at games beyond entertainment and looking at how games can drive social good. And I will talk a little bit more about the programs that do that work in a bit. And the last 2 points, we incubate new game projects through executive production and engage the public about the power of games through digital and live arcades, although most of them have been digital lately. So Game Plan is, again, this collaboration between between IMLS and Games for Change, and specifically the Games for Change Student Challenge. So we've been working on, for the past year and a half, to bring game design into museum education programs. And really the way that we've done that is by adapting a long-standing program that Games for Change has been running called the Games for Change Student Challenge. And that program has been running nationally for 6 years and is sort of proven program that benefits hundreds of educators, thousands of middle and high school students by teaching them game design and then challenging them to design, using the game design skills they've learned, to design games around specific themes. And our themes change year to year, and the themes are always some kind of social justice, social good themes. So for example, this year, the students in the games in the G4C Student Challenge are designing games around diversity and inclusion, around resilience, around advocating for animals. And again, the themes change yearly, but really the idea is that we're teaching students how to design not just games, but games for impact. So the plan was to bring this game design program into museum settings, and at the beginning, you know, the plan was to bring it in person into museum settings, but then COVID hit and we really had to adapt and started to think about how we could bring museum educators into this program, bring this program into museum settings virtually, and could that help museum educators connect with their community in a time when it was really hard for museums to connect with community. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna show a short video that sort of introduces the program. If I can find my mouse. And then I will talk a little bit more specifically about the different components of the program. Let's see here. Okay, here we go.
Game Plan is a professional development program that brings museum educators together from across the country to learn about games, to learn about the power that games can have to engage learners, and to help museum educators design and run a game design program with youth in their communities. Game Plan is a program that brings together about 50 to 60 museum educators from 40 museums across the country. We come together regularly to learn about games, to learn how to design games, and to learn how to use game-like learning in museum contexts. As well as the professional development, museum educators are also learning how to run the Games for Change Student Challenge in their museum context. So they are running youth-facing programs where youth are designing games that are that focus on the museum's content and collections, as well as a theme this year of resilience through games. The games that the youth are designing are eligible to be submitted to our student challenge competition, and there will be some winning games and some prizes and some exciting stuff that happens around that. But at the end of the day, I think the real power of the program is the watching these museum educators come together and collaborate, as well as watching them really start to understand how games and play can have a place in museums and can help to drive engagement with the collections, as well as deeper understanding of the concepts that the museum is trying to teach.
I think game design can impact museum education in a variety of ways. I think that games are such compelling tools for learning and are so engaging for youth and for students. Some of these youth are coming from a variety of different backgrounds, and games are something that are universally accessible in terms of everybody knows how to play. I also think that there are opportunities through games to reach youth and reach audiences and attendees, both physically and digitally. Some of the educators in our program are creating digital experiences for their students, or they're taking their youth through the video game design process. and equipping youth with skills in like hard skills in coding and development and in game design. So there's just such an elegant solution here to tick so many different boxes.
My biggest takeaway from the program has been that this platform is a unique opportunity to link storytelling with gaming. I see game design and museum education as a great way to discuss and work through obstacles associated with real-world challenges. For example, games can be created based on events that gave rise to art movements. Learning about games can help museum educators by inspiring them to create museum content within the context of a world that visitors can see themselves in.
Something that I've been really surprised about in doing this work with the team of educators, museum educators from around the country, is how open folks are to finding new ways, new techniques to build up audience engagement with the collections. We always see things behind glass in museums. Sometimes there's a distance between the visitor and the stories that we see represented in the wall text. But through game design, the playfulness of game design really mixes up the rules and allows people to also bring their own stories, bring their own ideas, their own understanding, their own meanings to the museum.
At professional development and the office hours for game plan, we were using different virtual techniques, tools, how to create games on different web-based platforms or in an analog way, and just receiving the feedback from museum educators about how they can already incorporate what they're learning at professional development into their lesson planning for camps and workshops. I think that's what really made it special.
I'm so glad that this is a successful program. I'm glad to see how many people are participating and how many other organizations are participating in it. And just happy to see people using games in education and educational context. And just happy to see what else comes of this.
Hoping out of this, I mean, I hope that I will have, by the time the program is through, designed a couple of really good games that we can play with and continue to play test and refine with our visitors at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I think like these games are going to be fun for kids, but also for adults. So I'm hoping to use them in both contexts. And I'm also excited to see, once I implement the curriculum that I've designed around this, what students come up with and what campers come up with. What kind of games will they create to help us all learn about resilience at the Brooklyn Navy Yard? And so it's been a kind of joyful learning opportunity, and it's given me more tools and vocabulary for my toolkit as a museum educator that I believe I will use not just this year, but well into the future. I hope that even more museum professionals have the opportunity to learn from Games for Change. Thanks so much.
Okay, so that was meant to give you just a little overview of the program, and I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into some of the pieces of it. So we started by recruiting museums, right, and for participation. We recruited museums from across the United States, and preference was given to New York City, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and Detroit, just because those are cities that were originally we were meant to work with, because that's where we run our student challenge. But we ended up with a mix of museums from 18 different states. So 40 museums were accepted, total of 62 museum educators participating from 18 different states. You know, during the application process, we held information sessions and individual conversations and meetings, and we, at the end of the day, over 70 museums applied to participate. And, you know, according to our applications, the museums that were participating were really interested in ways to increase youth engagement, to learn new innovative practices, to level up their virtual programming, and connect museum content to a younger audience. The expectations that were set for participation were that the museum educators would participate in 3 professional development sessions held over the course of about 8 months. They would implement the student challenge in their museum settings, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, and that there would be active participation in an online community that we created in order to connect the museum educators together, even though they come from different states, different communities, and also different disciplines, right? They were all different kinds of museums. So the professional development sessions that the museum educators are attending, there are 3, like I said, there are 3 of them, and they focused on 3 different things. The first was an introduction to game design and digital game design tools. And that session really was about kind of the nuts and bolts of game design, as well as the nuts and bolts of the student challenge program. And the museum educators were introduced to Scratch as a game design tool. They got an in-depth training in Scratch so that they would then be able to teach it to youth in their settings for the student challenge program. The picture that's on the screen right now are the museum educators doing a game design challenge. One of the challenging things for us as designers of these sessions were to teach, we had to really think about how are we going to teach these museum educators game design virtually, right? Because when we teach game design, we generally always start with analog, hands-on game design. And in order to do this virtually, we had to be really creative about the ways that we brought people together. So what you see in this picture is prior to the session, we asked all the museum educators to gather a set of household materials, the same set of household materials. And this group of 6 educators worked together with the materials they had to create a game that would invoke an emotion. I believe their emotion was silliness, and they created this cool costume game with foil and cups, and it was really fun, and everyone had a good time playing it. But we really did have to think creatively about how to bring this program to life virtually. And the hope was that because we were thinking really creatively about how to bring this program to life virtually, it would help the museum educators think about how they could deliver the program virtually. So we really tried throughout the professional developments to allow the museum educators to learn by doing. The second session, museum educators came with a learning goal or a piece of content that they felt like didn't always land well, or they had a hard time getting youth to engage with, and they designed a learning game around it. So we took them through the design process. Most of them were analog games, some of them were digital games, but they left the 8-hour session with the prototype of a game and then went on to work on the game in between session 2 and session 3. And session 3 is actually upcoming in a couple weeks, but we're going to be working on designing game-like learning experiences. So creating experiences at your museum, exhibits, experiences for youth to participate in that feel like a game. And we're also bringing together some practitioners from the field to talk to them about best practices. So that's one component of the program. And then another component of the program that I will talk about is just this online collaborative community. We are working with a platform called Participate, and all of the participants in the program have access to this online community. There's the ability for them to discuss things. We have a whole resource page up there that has the game design curriculum and curricular materials. And they can talk to each other, they can communicate. And one thing that we found is that this is a really valuable piece for the museum educators who often are kind of working with in their own museum. Some of these museums are so small that there's only one museum educator at the museum, and so they're kind of in a silo. And they've really valued the opportunity to come together and play games and talk about the programs that they're running. Great, so I'll just tell you a little bit about what we've found as we've piloted this program, because it's the first time we've done it. One of the things that we know for sure is that this program requires flexibility. It's very different than schools, which we knew going in, but because with schools, even if schools are different, the general structure of a school is the same, but every museum is so different. The way they approach their education programs, the content that's in the museum, the size of the museum, the community that museum serves, like it's just so different that the program really, we had to very quickly be very flexible with, and so what that meant was that the student challenge became, and the implementing the student challenge became something that we figured out ways for museum educators to be able to customize it so they could deliver it in a way that made sense for their museum. So that's one of the most important things that we learned. And I think moving forward, as we work with museum educators, we know that we can have a kind of skeleton of what we think should happen, but we have to allow a lot of space for museum educators to be able to be flexible and implement as they see fit. The professional development has proven to be the most valuable. The museum educators have really valued the kind of tools that they're able to put in their toolboxes. And certainly the implementation of the student game design challenge is one of those tools, but they themselves stepping into the role of game designers, they themselves understanding how to design experiences in museum settings that are game-like, and just the kind of also just being exposed to lots of different ways of delivering programs virtually, lots of different protocols for working with youth, that has been the most valuable. And then, like I said before, museums can be silos. So really this online community and collaboration has been particularly valuable. And I think, you know, that's part of what makes the platform that Heidi just spoke about so powerful as well. Just that there's a way for museums to come together, to share content, to share best practices and work together. And then, you know, we are going to be running a second cohort in the fall. It's going to be smaller and focused primarily on the professional development program, but we're very excited to sort of take what we've learned and move it into out of a pilot and into like a more structured program. So with that, I think I will turn it back to Helen if she's here.
I am here.
Okay, and I'm gonna hand it over to Helen.
Okay.
And okay.
Here we go. Okay.
All right.
So here we go. So I hope, can you see that? Is that showing up?
Hi, Helen. Yes, we can see it.
Great. All right. So hello, everybody. I am sorry for that snafu. You are not going to see my face in order to preserve bandwidth, but I am going to, I'm going to sweep the stage instead of set the stage, and we'll have plenty of time for questions because I'm not going to take very long to do this. Clearly, you have heard from some fantastic grantees of ours in the through national leadership, and I'm just going to flip through the slides to get to something that's going to be valuable here. Let's see. So there we are. So what I hope that you all got from this showcase is, one second. Is a new understanding about the cool things going on in museums and what they're doing in the education arena in this regard, and particularly get some familiarity with museums for digital learning and game plan projects. And now I'm going to give you sort of an inside scoop into the grant programs that make this stuff possible and could potentially be useful to you guys. So IMLS is the independent federal grant-making agency that is the primary source of federal funding for the nation's museums and libraries. And the idea is that we ensure that all Americans have access to museum, library, and information services. So that's the base from which we operate. Now, the question is, oh, and this is my DIY Venn diagram, which I could probably use a little Venn diagram tool the next time, but we'll go with this. This is my answer to why museums and games, or why museums and digital media and learning. And So the answer to that question is that I've sort of tried to put together some of the areas where games can have a learning impact and museums have an interest, where these come together. So as indicated by this diagram, and certainly by our previous speakers, you could see that lots of projects may address more than one of these learning outcomes or ideas. So museums use games as delivery systems for content knowledge and behavior change, as you saw with some of the examples that Heidi showed. Or you can imagine a game that helps you understand climate change and maybe provokes behavior in recycling behavior or something like that. Games are used by museums as guides to physical spaces and content. We've supported some projects that use games to promote an engagement within the gallery space itself as you move around the gallery. Museums use gameplay to promote perceptual, attentional, and cognitive abilities and skill development. And this is sort of less associated with particular content or collections objects. But some museums, such as children's museums, have this as part of their mission, that sort of brain development tools. Arana talked about game design, which itself, when done in a museum setting with content and themes of a museum, is building all sorts of 21st century skills. So that's a really good, game plan was a good example of that. And finally, many museums are using games to augment their collections information and metadata. So they're using the power of the crowd to gather information about collections through games. So there's two programs that we offer that are the primary sources for funding for these kinds of things that we're talking about. Museums for America and the National Leadership Grants for Museums. Museums for America has the goal of strengthening the ability of an individual museum to serve its public. So this is primarily allowing museums to fulfill their high-level goals in their strategic plan. You can see some of the details about how the funding works. But an important thing to remember is that, only museums can apply to Museums for America, but that doesn't mean that game developers can't be a partner in a museum project and get funding through the museum's budget for that project. An example of that kind of Museums for America project is something we funded back in 2014 at historic Hudson Valley. They got funding to work with developers to design and build a game called Traders and Raiders, which allowed users and usually students to learn about the transatlantic trade and piracy and how this part of historic Hudson Valley played a role in this vast and complex system. The National Leadership Grant Program is a slightly different goal. The goal for National Leadership is to advance the whole field's ability to serve the public. So you're solving a problem in museum practice or in the museum field. I'm not going to give any examples because both Museums for Digital Learning and Gameplay are perfect examples. So I don't have to provide those at all. Those are projects that are producing resources that are going to help museums during their project and afterwards do this new level of engagement. You can see here that grants go up to $750,000. Research is funded there, but there's a one-to-one match for non-research projects. And finally, I just want to point out some of the characteristics and eligibility issues for these two programs. And I've mentioned this already, but when we're looking at Museums for America, we're really looking at an individual institution and its community and its target audiences. But successful projects really have to demonstrate that they have in-depth knowledge. They have to show that there's a demonstrable result, what's going to come out of this project. a new program, a new exhibit, a new game, something like that. On the flip side, national leadership grants are about broad impact. Of course, you still have to be an expert and have that in-depth knowledge, but you get to be collaborative. So you bring those people that you need to the table to help make a project successful. And shared results are very important. So intentionally producing something that's going to have legs and get out there into the field. Eligibility is a bit different. As I said, museums are the only eligible entities for Museums for America. But in national leadership, because we know there are many kinds of organizations that can work to benefit the museum field, including like Games for Change, where Arana is, we accept applications from museums, from institutions of higher ed, and from organizations that advance museums and the profession. And finally, just a quick time check here. We're going to have applications due. Oh, don't look at the gray bar. That's got the wrong years. Or just add 1 to the gray bar. That's your game challenge for the day. So we're looking at applications due in November of 2021. This year, you don't have to go back in time. We'll check them out, make sure they're okay and ready to go to review. And the review period is about 4 months there. And awards will be made in the summer of 2022 for projects that begin on September 1st. And my colleagues and I are available throughout the process of application and consideration of what you're going to submit to help you along the way, to help you construct the most competitive project you can. So never hesitate to contact a program officer. Our names are all on the website. When you go to our website and look for apply for a grant or grant programs, you will find our names and contact information. So that's all I'm going to say. I know we have some questions in the chat, and I know that I'm going to just move this slide. Thank you. Good luck. And please, let's hear some questions.
Wonderful, Helen. So hello, everyone. This is Ashley Jones with IMLS. I'm just taking a look at the questions box. We have a few questions we can start with. The first one comes from Lois, and this came through during Heidi's presentation, but I think could apply to either project. Lois asks, are your resources accessible for students with special needs?
I can talk about that a little bit for MDL. You know, each of the individual organizations that are creating resource kits are responsible for the content that's a part of them. But I know at Field Museum, we really follow universal design for learning standards. So making sure that we are considering all different types of learners and their abilities, and also thinking about different learning styles, because we know that that's going to make everyone really successful in engaging with the resource kits. So yes, I would say that that's definitely something I know that the core partners are thinking about, and it's something that we are encouraging the new museum partners to think about as they're coming on board as well. And it's definitely something that the museum field broadly thinks about regularly.
And I'm happy to just answer that for our program as well. And I just saw in the chat, I apologize that you couldn't see the slides. I'm sure there's a way for us to make those available, but I said most everything that was on them, so I'm sorry about that. But one thing that I didn't say that I should say is that one of the things that this program has resulted in for Games for Change is an adaptation of our student challenge student-facing curriculum for museum educators to use in museum settings. So that curriculum has been designed in such a way that it gives recommendations for mediation as well as extensions, and has been designed again, using universal design practices. So that is available on the Games for Change website for free.
Wonderful. All right. So we've got another question. This one comes from Caitlin. This is both for Heidi or Arana. The question is, can you share the content of how the content of the projects you presented today can be tied to national or state standards for learning?
Sure, yeah. I did not point this out, but I should have. On the website, on the platform, each of the activities is aligned to national learning standards. So we make available NGSS if it's a science resource, the C3 framework, Common Core, depending on what the content area connections are. And we also note that, you know, the resources that are a part of MDL are not meant to be core curriculum. They are meant to add to and create another rich layer on top of existing curricula for K12 education and K12 classrooms. And so really looking at where the standards alignment that's listed on those resource kits and activities within the resource kits fits within your core curriculum, and thinking about making that connection so that students don't just have a chance to, you know, engage with that particular standard with MDL, but also get to have a fuller picture of what that standard is all about with the core curriculum as well. So really thinking about that as nice icing on top of the curriculum cake.
And for game plan for the student challenge curriculum, the curriculum is aligned with the next generation science standards, as well as the 21st century skills. But really for the next generation science standards, it's mostly the cross-cutting concepts and things like being able to think systemically, complex problem solving, making connections, those kinds of things that game design really helps to foster.
Great, thanks. So we've got another question. This is specific to Museums for Digital Learning. Can you talk about the benefits of curating these resources into a single site like Museums for Digital Learning, rather than the museums offering these resources on their own websites?
Absolutely, I can speak to that, and Helen, feel free to chime in too, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on this from IMLS's perspective as well. So, you know, one of the things that we recognize as the core team is that different museums have different platforms, and, you know, some museums have national, if not sometimes international recognition, thinking about Smithsonian and other really large institutions. Other institutions are going to have, you know, more regional recognition. And then some museums are very local, but have really rich stories to tell that can add to students' understanding. And so, you know, every teacher is not going to be aware of every single platform that exists online for the wide variety of museums that exist across the country. And so really aggregating all of these and creating a platform that brings all of these pieces together allows for more visibility for those museums and more awareness for K12 educators about what types of resources exist, maybe not in their own backyard, but, you know, 5 states away. And then also thinking about the affordances of bringing together the collections and stories that exist across that rich tapestry of museums across the country. So what happens when, and this is one of the things that I noted, was that History Colorado and Field Museum collaborated on a few kits last year. And what we were exploring in that was really thinking about what rich stories can we tell when we bring together the collections and expertise of 2 very different museums in many ways. So the Field Museum is a natural history museum, and so, you know, much of our collections and much of our expertise is really in the way of thinking through a scientific lens. And when we think about the human aspects, we tell that story through an anthropological lens. Whereas History of Colorado is really coming from an historical perspective, a social science perspective. And so we were able to create a kit that explored different ways of knowing about human history, thinking about the different lenses that anthropology can afford through more of a scientific lens, and through using the tools of history, more of a social science and humanities lens. And so you really can think about a much more layered understanding that you're building in students as you're thinking about a particular topic or theme when they're exposed to different perspectives on that theme. You know, one of the things that we're interested in looking down the line as we're creating additional kits is thinking about how, you know, a science museum like the Field Museum can collaborate with an art museum to help create new on-ramps for students who might be, you know, more interested in the arts than they are in science, but we can still tell really interesting science stories and art stories through those two different lenses. So it really just creates more perspectives and more lenses for students and teachers to be able to explore all of the topics that museums have expertise in and collections in.
And I would just add that you can search across the entire platform. So your search results will yield resources from a variety of museums, which you would not have found if you're just going to individual institutions at a time. So Ashley, can we squeeze in one more question, or are we at time here?
You know, I think we have one question I think we can do with it with the time we have left. It seems like it'll be pretty quick. This is from Liz, and the question's for Arana. Is there a way to apply for the fall cohort of Game Plan?
Absolutely. Yeah, so we are going to start publicizing application process in July. So the best way to do it would be to go to the Games for Change website, either start checking back in July or sign up for our newsletter, and you'll for sure hear about it.
Okay, so we're at 2 o'clock. We know that there are new sessions starting at 2 o'clock. We want to let you go and free up the airwaves. And I thank my colleague Ashley and Arana and Heidi tremendously for this session. And we welcome you to contact any of us to follow up and continue asking questions or learning about opportunities. Thanks a lot.